Well, 28 years later has been hugely anticipated by many fans of the first two films in the series, but they may not be getting anything close to what they want or expect. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. The IMDb synopsis for 28 Years Later reads, "A group of survivors of the rage virus live on a small island. When one of the group leaves the island on a mission into the mainland, he discovers secrets, wonders, and horrors that have mutated not only the infected, but other survivors." I don't think that's quite a good description of what the movie as a whole is, or certainly what type of movie this is. Basically, 28 years after the events of the first two movies, there is the European mainland, I think they said, has been cut off, or the UK maybe specifically, has been cut off and quarantined, so the rest of the world is doing okay, even though events at the end of the second movie would suggest that it was going to be spreading worldwide. Evidently, they got that under control, and it seems like just the UK is being quarantined, and heavily quarantined. Like, you walk on, and one of those, you walk onto the mainland and you're done. You don't get rescued. There's no coming back from that. So there's this small community surviving in somewhat primitive fashion on an island near the mainland, and they just occasionally make trips there for foraging, for other needs. And the zombies on the mainland have evolved into two types. One is more sluggish, not really the traditional zombie, but I think in some ways inspired by it. And I won't spoil kind of like their movement and their vibe and their look and stuff. But I think it's interesting. It's certainly a far cry from the berserk rage running zombies of the first two movies. The other type, or I would say the main type of zombie, does seem to be descended from those original zombies, but for some reason, they're all naked. I thought I knew why this might be conceptually, but there's an event deeper into the movie that just dismantled that theory. So they are just naked for some unknown reason. Now, on that topic, I know that some Christians might in particular be curious about, like, what's the nature of the nudity in the MPAA's description. It says graphic nudity. It seems to mostly refer to frontal male nudity as far as like graphic, but the naked zombies, they appear frequently, but there's always distance, shaky cam, quick cuts, obstructing objects, and mud, or maybe it's dried blood that's gone brown. Those combinations of things are really, in my experience, they were obscuring any kind of good look that I might have at people's private areas, with few exceptions. And those exceptions tended to be male frontal nudity, which wasn't like problematic for me in terms of temptation. I wouldn't say it was exciting to see, but it was still very very brief and just kind of all over the place. The exception would be two things. One, a brutish male zombie who is featured more prominently, and a very pregnant zombie woman. But even those, they're pretty brief cuts. The nudity is unflattering, it's non-sexual, and I suspect possibly even prosthetics being used of their private parts instead of actually naked actors. I could be wrong on that, but I would be very ready to believe that. Bottom line, I didn't feel like I was being bombarded with imagery that I needed to constantly be avoiding with my eyes, but of course your experience may be different. Speaking of a different experience, this one is a very different experience than 28 days later and 28 weeks later. For starters, it's I think a coming of age story. The boy, who's kind of like the main character we're focused on, he's 12 years old, and he's trained to survive by his dad in the first act. And we see in that part of the movie his love and admiration for his dad. But then, we eventually see some serious flaws of his dad that are exposed. The boy also then, in the second act, has lengthy experiences with his mom, but she is having some medical problems. And so he's kind of having to act as her caretaker in some way, sort of a parent to her in some moments. And then he ultimately has to go out on his own and really walk into independence. And even in that moment and moments earlier is kind of playing the role of a parent on multiple levels. And by the end, he's empowered in a way that is usually reserved for children's movies that make kids way more capable, confident, and fearless than I think is realistic. And so by the end of the movie, I was just I was really taken out. The further that we got into this boy's story and what he was experiencing, and how he was reacting to it or not reacting to it, in my estimation, in a realistic fashion. There is some great drama that had me tearing up, but also some extensive time given to a vibe of philosophical reflection in the third act that made me really miss the feverish intensity of the first two movies, which is never really quite brought back here, I don't think. Some of the tonal shifts in the movie, brief moments where they kind of dip into comedy in a way you wouldn't expect, they're fairly subtle and were welcome surprises of humor for me. But there are a few moments that just felt tonally off, or that have kids behaving or speaking in ways that feel very unnatural to me. On top of that, there is a bizarre and radical tonal shift in the final minutes of the movie that clearly seem intended to set up another movie that will itself, if it follows the tone of the very end of this movie, be radically different and bizarrely and Britishly comedic in tone, I think. Maybe some kind of fusion of punk, Monty Python, and zombies. I don't know what to expect of another movie after this one if it's going to be in the tone of the final moments of this movie. Now, don't get me wrong. Taken sections at a time, I was really engaged with and appreciating this movie. But as a whole, when I realized the experience was coming to an end, and then I walked out of the theater and was just thinking back on it, I was like, wow, that was really tonally disjointed with multiple little story sections that only felt connected and building on each other by this sort of coming-of-age motif that itself didn't feel right to me, because the boy who is coming of age, I mean, he's actually dealing with issues that most of us face over many years, mostly in adulthood rather than in our teenage years. So the pieces, the individual acts of the story were each worthwhile to me in their own way. But I look back pretty disappointed when I consider it as a whole. As far as the cast goes, the acting all felt really strong to me, including that of the child actor. That can be an easy thing for me to just feel disconnected from. I probably am more critical than many people of child actors. But the script here wisely, I mean, he was a great actor to begin with, but I think the script also wisely creates this medicinal explanation in one moment for why he doesn't go into the incredibly intense depths of panic and despair that a child his age experiencing what he was experiencing in that moment would. In other words, they didn't ask this child actor to emote in ways that a child actor is almost always unlikely to be convincingly capable of. And all the adults felt very solid. I have no complaints about the rest of the cast. As far as the stunts and visuals, thankfully, this movie returns to the very grounded visual vibe of the first movie, although in HD. The first one had a kind of like a VHS or DVD at best kind of quality to the visuals because of how they shot it, and I think the cameras that they used. My son actually told me that they filmed this one all entirely with iPhones, which I would believe. I mean, phones have come a long way. So it feels grounded. I would believe that they shot it all with iPhones, and yet it's in HD, you know, so I appreciate that just little upgrade, even though they're keeping it really grounded. There are some really cool, what I would describe as evolutions of the bullet time camera effect in some early kill shots with the camera rotating around the action, but instead of the slow rotation around the action of like the Matrix, it's extremely fast. And it's kind of a cool, snappy vibe. Visually and stylistically, I wish the whole movie felt like the first act and how they were using the camera in the action, because it was the closest overall to the being like the previous movies, but with some added style that also didn't sacrifice groundedness. The first act of this movie I was really into. Okay. Themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on here that could trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? There's an opening scene that definitely has some religious themes, some Christian backdrop, I think more specifically a Catholic backdrop of some kind, and it looked like, oh, they are really establishing something here. We're going to be dealing with themes of faith maybe in the face of horrific, traumatic circumstances, but then, nope, they just abandon any theme that might have been setting up, except for maybe how it's going to play into the movie after this. I think that that's likely to play a significant role, faith in some way, in the movie after this. But seemed like kind of like a, just kidding kind of thematic setup. Really, I think the main theme of this movie probably has to do with seeing the flaws and recognizing the fragility and mortality of your parents, becoming independent yourself, even a parent yourself. But the context for these themes in which they're trying to develop them, the story context, the tonal shifts as well, really kept me from truly reflecting on them in a worthwhile way. So I think there's some stuff there that's probably intended, but I wasn't connecting well enough for it to really sink in to me in a meaningful way. All right, no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, oh man, skip this one. Let them do however many more they're going to do after this one, because clearly they seem to have some idea in mind of that this one is the beginning of. See if those go the distance, see if they get made, see if there's some positive buzz around them, and then give this one a go so that you can just kind of binge whatever the artistic intention is all at once. But this experience, coming to it from the first two, it's disjointed enough, incomplete feeling enough at the end, and just not feeling like a continuation of what the first two movies felt like. That kind of dramatic shift in vibe in a franchise has worked for you before in something like the Alien franchise, but here it just feels like a totally different zombie franchise they want to get going with. This is the starting point. So wait and let them just make that whole franchise, see if it's successful, see what you hear about it. But for now, just enjoy those first two movies and consider them your complete 28 later franchise experience. This one's rated R for strong bloody violence, grisly images, graphic nudity, language, and brief sexuality. And those are all of my thoughts for now on 28 years later. As always, love getting your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then I hope you will check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.